Picture this. You're scrolling through social media, and suddenly, you're bombarded with an avalanche of cat videos. Before you know it, you spend hours scrolling and obsessing over these fluffy felines, completely unaware that your cat obsession might not be entirely your own doing. And no, I'm not talking about some sinister feline plot, throwback to the 2001 movie, Cats and Dogs. Instead, I'm referring to something far more bizarre and real, a microscopic parasite that may be pulling the strings from inside your own brain. Enter Toxoplasma gondii, the tiny puppeteer that might just be responsible for turning you to the dark side. In other words, the cat person. Don't hate me, cat-loving people. Now, before you start side-eyeing Garfield, let me explain. Toxoplasma gondii, affectionately known as toxo to our parasitologist friends, it's a single-celled organism behind the condition toxoplasmosis, an infection that affects up to 50% of the world's human population. And yes, you heard that right, 50%. Not 5, not 15, 50%. Specifically, a meta-analysis on women of childbearing age within 44 countries found that the prevalence is between 50 to 80% for Latin America, 20 to 60% of parts of Eastern and Central Europe, and about 30 to 50% of the Middle East, and so on, leading to essentially a worldwide distribution. What that also means is that there's a pretty decent chance that you are infected yourself. Now rest assured, the chance of you becoming a creature from The Last of Us is relatively slim. But that's not to say that this parasite is harmless. Oh no, Toxoplasma gondii isn't just content with hanging out in your body. This parasite has much grander ambitions. To be more exact, it basically wants to manipulate your behavior to make you fall head over heels for cats. And why, you ask? Well, because cats are Toxo's ticket to having sex. In other words, reproduction. And really, its only ticket at that. You see, Toxoplasma gondii has a rather peculiar life cycle. While it can infect pretty much any warm-blooded animal, including obviously us humans, it can only reproduce sexually in the intestines of cats. This means that for Toxo to complete its life cycle and make some Toxo Juniors, it needs to end up in a cat's belly. And how does it accomplish this? Well, obviously by turning its host into a crazy cat lady. Kind of. To be more exact, its goal is to essentially turn whoever they're infecting into easier potential prey for cats, which would then help them get a nice first-class ticket to a cat's stomach. For example, if you're a mouse, being terrified of cats is pretty much as ingrained into your nature as preferring chocolate ice cream over vanilla is ingrained into mine. It's basically the kind of instinct that's been hardwired into our brains over millions of years of evolution. But Toxo pretty much says, nah, screw that. To start with, infected rodents don't just lose their fear of cats, they actually become attracted to them. Well, kind of. Their odor, to be precise. For example, one study showed that infected rats showed a preference for areas with cat odor versus areas with odors of non-predators, such as rabbits. So it's almost like Toxo flips a switch in their tiny brains, turning the scent of impending doom into some kind of irresistible rodent pheromone. But it doesn't end here. Oh no. Not only are rodents suddenly attracted to their feline counterparts, but studies have also shown that infected rodents become more exploratory and less cautious in general, even in the types of areas that rodents generally show more fear towards. So that's all to say that not only are infected rodents more likely to cross paths with a cat due to their newfound love of feline fragrances, but they're also more likely to be out and about in general, and thus increasing the chance of becoming prey. And to add fuel to the fire, research has also shown that Toxo causes a reduction in motor skills and concentration, meaning that they're also now worse at evading said predators. Unfortunately for everyone, but cats, these behavioral and physiological effects have crossover into other species as well, including humans. While we might not be running around sniffing cat urine, hopefully, studies have shown with a fair degree of confidence that it does affect our behavior in certain ways. For example, similar to our friend Remy, some researchers have found links between Toxo infection and increased risk-taking behavior. For instance, it's been noted that infection leads to altered production of dopamine and certain sex-specific hormones. For example, in men, infected individuals have higher levels of testosterone, while women actually had lower levels. In addition, infected college students were 1.4 times more likely to major in business, 1.7 times more likely to have an emphasis in management and entrepreneurship, and 1.8 times more likely to start their own business. And now, this might sound pretty good, so far, but don't you worry. There are a ton of negatives to go along with it. For one, the reduced motor skills seems to translate to us humans as well. with an observation that seroprevalence of toxo in humans is associated with an increased risk of traffic accidents of 2.65 times. On top of this, numerous neurological disorders have been associated with infection as well, such as depression, ADHD, and bipolar disorder type 1, just to name a few. And this, my friends, isn't even taking into account the active symptomatic form of toxoplasmosis, which can lead to a few weeks or months of a flu-like condition, and potentially even develop into more serious symptoms in those with weak immune systems, such as seizures, loss of coordination, and eye problems. And unfortunately, if a woman becomes infected during pregnancy, a condition known as congenital toxoplasmosis can occur, which can cause numerous serious developmental and neurological problems. So at this point, you may be wondering, how exactly does a microscopic organism wield such power in its host brains? Well, it turns out that toxo is quite the asshole. Once it infects a host, it forms cysts in various tissues, which can eventually include the brain. These cysts, and the parasites themselves, then interact with surrounding tissue, which can alter gene expression, enzymes, and other things that all lead to alterations in neurotransmitter levels, and thus causing changes in behavior. But before you start thinking that toxo is some kind of diabolical mastermind, it's worth noting that this behavioral manipulation is just a happy accident. Toxo did not sit down one day and plot out a complex scheme to control the world through cat videos. It's simply the result of millions of years of evolution, where parasites that were better at getting from one host to another were more likely to survive and reproduce. But this begs the question, how does one pick up this feline-loving freeloader to begin with? Well, the most common routes of infection for humans depend on where you live. In some places, it may be exposure to cat feces, but in other places like the US, the most common transmission route is actually through raw or undercooked pork, which by the way, can also give you tapeworms, Trichinella spiralis, and many other unpleasant things, so make sure you cook your meat. Though, because cat feces is a transmission route, it's often advised that pregnant women should avoid changing litter boxes, because as mentioned, toxo can be particularly dangerous to newborns. Now, you might be thinking, if toxo is so widespread and potentially influential, why isn't it making headlines? Well, for one thing, mind-controlling cat parasite doesn't exactly roll off the tongue or sell headlines like economic crisis or whatever political scandal is currently going on. But more importantly, the effects of toxo on human behavior are still a subject of intense debate in the scientific community, with some researchers arguing that we're giving toxo too much credit, so to speak. After all, the human brain is incredibly complex, and it's notoriously difficult to prove direct cause and effect relationships, especially when it comes to behavior. But even if toxo isn't the master of puppets that some make it out to be, its mere existence raises some mind-bending questions. For example, how much of our behavior is truly our own, and how much of our thoughts and actions are actually shaped by invisible influences we're not even aware of, let alone have control of. It's enough to make you question everything, which coincidentally is exactly what toxo wants you to do. Just kidding. Or am I? The plot thickens when we consider that toxo might not just be influencing individuals, but entire cultures. Some scientists have suggested that differences in toxo infection rates could partially explain cultural variations around the world. And interestingly, one study found that countries with higher rates of toxo infection tend to have higher levels of aggregate neuroticism, and among Western nations, higher levels of masculine sex roles and uncertainty avoidance. So basically, toxo is playing the longest game of Civ ever, just slightly tweaking stats as it goes. That being said, before you start blaming toxo for all the world's problems, or using it as an excuse for your own questionable life choices, it's important to remember that correlation does not equal causation, and the study's author actually emphasizes this point. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other. For all we know, it could be that certain cultural factors or environmental conditions make toxo infection more likely, rather than the other way around. Moreover, the study found that toxo prevalence only explained a fraction of the variation in cultural dimensions, suggesting that even if it does influence human culture, it's only one among many factors. Still, the potential implications of toxo's influence are staggering. If a tiny parasite can indeed sway human behavior, even slightly, what does that mean for our understanding of free will? Regardless, I'm not even going to attempt to answer that question, seeing that I only barely passed my philosophy course. But what's perhaps more interesting is the implication of the connectedness of the natural world, as Toxoplasma gondii isn't some anomaly in nature. It's just one example of the many often bizarre relationships that exist between different organisms. For instance, the natural world is full of parasites, symbionts, and symbiotes, if you're watching this from the Marvel Universe, that is, as well as many other creatures that influence each other's behaviors in ways we're only beginning to understand. Take for instance the cordyceps fungus, which turns ants into zombies, compelling them to climb to the top of plants before dying and allowing the fungus to spread its spores to new potential victims. Or consider the bacteria in our very own gut microbiome, which some researchers believe may influence our mood, food craving, learning ability, and social behavior, among other things. Now Toxo doesn't suddenly seem quite so outlandish. In fact, when you start looking for them, which to be honest I try not to, mind-altering microbes seem to be everywhere. There's a virus that makes caterpillars climb to the top of trees and then basically liquefies its tissue to further spread the virus. There are parasites that make fish swim to the surface, making them easy prey for birds. And even the common flu virus might make us more social, and thus increasing our chances of spreading the infection. Like I said, mind-altering microbes everywhere. But regarding Toxoplasma gondii, despite its potentially far-reaching effects, it's important to note that for most people, a toxo infection is relatively harmless. Emphasis on relatively though. Your immune system usually keeps the parasite in check, confining it to tiny cysts in your tissues where it can't cause much trouble. It's only when the immune system is compromised, like in people with HIV or other underlying health problems, that toxo can break free and cause havoc. That being said, if you're worried about picking up this mind-altering parasite, there are some simple precautions you can take. For example, cooking your meat thoroughly, washing fruits and vegetables, and wearing gloves while gardening can all help reduce your risk of infection. And if you're a cat owner, don't worry, you don't need to rehome Garfield just yet. Regular litter box cleaning and good hygiene practices can go a long way in preventing toxo transmission. But maybe we're also looking at this all wrong. Maybe, instead of seeing toxo as some kind of sinister puppeteer, we should view it as a reminder of our deep connection to the natural world. And there might be a silver lining, as some of the effects of toxo could have potentially positive effects, such as increased risk-taking, dopamine levels, and more. In fact, while not in humans, a study has found that infected wolves, of all things, were more likely to show behavior that determined leadership roles, perhaps even motivating establishment of new independent packs. The study also found that at times, an infected wolf would become the only breeding male in a pack, thus leading to the potential assumption that it might increase reproductive fitness. So who knows, maybe this parasite is actually the key to a successful love life. But anyways, the next time you find yourself inexplicably drawn to yet another cat video while scrolling on Instagram or TikTok, you might want to pause and ask yourself, is this really me, or is this toxo calling the shots? And even if it is toxo, does it really matter? After all, in a world full of chaos and uncertainty, perhaps there's something comforting about the idea that even our quirks and preferences might be part of some grand cosmic plan, even if that plan was devised by a microscopic parasite with a fondness for doing the dirty in cat stomachs. Thanks for watching, and until next time on Living Zoo.